Hello, I'm Mark Baer. You're watching the YourTown television program. I'm with Jeffrey Munks, and this is the concluding episode of our conversation. And this is kind of a bit of a summary and a bit of to the where we are now. So kind of lessons along the way, and each thing leads to another thing, and that's been kind of the pattern of your career.
Yeah.
So what are you thinking?
Well, if I had to, look back over the journey, it's been a magnificent one. It continues to be a magnificent one. But when I cast for specific nuggets that I could turn around and convey, I think one of the most impactful relates to the nature of and challenges associated with leadership. I will never forget Jack Welch, the legendary CEO from General Electric, and Vern Clark, who served as the Chief of Naval Operations when our Executive Learning Office was first stood up. They both said the same things when they were interviewed at retirement. They were asked, when you look back at your career, can you identify your biggest mistake? And they both said the same thing. They said, not acting soon enough when I knew I had a serious personnel problem, ignoring that issue that just wasn't going to go away. And when you think about that, that's something that all of us can identify with. I don't care whether you're in the public sector, the private sector, whether you work at a library or on a warship at sea, whether you work in a grocery store or a software development company. We've all had that experience where we have been leaning into the stone, pushing as hard as we can, and we look over and we see a fellow employee who's hanging out at the water cooler, griping about this or that or the other thing, and doing everything other than leaning into that stone with us. And while we're having that thought, there's a simultaneous thought. The leadership knows about this. They know that this person isn't pulling their weight, yet they tolerate it. So what does that say about their real respect for us, the few who are actually doing the work? And when I say the few, there was a book written by Kurt Kaufman and Marcus Buckingham. I believe those were the authors, and it's called First Break All the Rules. They were part of the Gallup organization, and they did an incredible global survey of something like 800 organizations and close to 80,000 people, and they were looking at the issue of employee engagement. They asked a series of 12 questions designed to determine the level of engagement. And through the course of that survey, what they concluded was, in any given organization, public or private, 100% of all of the production, 100% of all the productivity is delivered by 29% of the employees. 50% of the people on payroll just show up, punch the clock, spend the time, and are on cruise control. And 21 or so percent, whatever the remainder is, are what Kaufman and Buckingham characterized as unengaged, disengaged. Those are the folks who are boat anchors, holding the organization back. Reading that, thinking about what Welch and what Clark said, and reflecting on my own experiences, I had something of an epiphany that actually led to another career we haven't talked about, which was in consulting, helping organizations develop their strategic plans and improving employee engagement. But think about it, Mark. If 29% of your people are delivering 100% of your productivity, what would the impact on the organization be if you could take one of those people from the 50% pool who were just showing up and turn them into a 29%er? Now you have 30%, and another, and another, and another. And so the game plan for organizational change and growth and development rests within those statistics. And as a senior leader, I really believe your job is to figure out how to support, how to love, how to encourage and enable that 29%, how to convert that 50%, and how to find another line of work for the 21%. In the kindest, most gracious, most loving way possible, it's time to sit down with those folks and have a conversation about where's your off-ramp? What do you really want to do in life? Because it clearly isn't this. That was a very profound realization for me.
And it's more complex than hiring and firing.
Oh, yeah. Well, when you stand at this point in time and look back, what did the 3 R's stand for? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. When you stand in this hyper-competitive environment today and look forward, those 3 R's, to me, stand for recruiting, retaining, and constantly retraining the very best people that you can find. So retention is a critical, ongoing challenge. Retraining gets to that notion of lifelong learning. If you're not learning, you're dying. And as a senior leader, you not only have to provide the opportunities and the incentive and the motivation for your people to learn, but you've got to demonstrate that you're doing it too.
So let's get to now.
Okay.
Let's get to now. Jeffrey Munks is writing books. And so you've kind of circled back to the beginning,
Yeah.
in a weird way.
Yeah.
And we'll be able to actually scan these in, so we don't even need to hold them up. And let's talk about where we are.
Since about age 16, I've been a prolific writer. I love to write. I got into typing in junior high school. So when computers hit the scene, I was already working the keyboard at about 120 words a minute. And it was very easy to make the transition to computers. And I'd love to write. And over the years, I've written countless business plans, white papers, technical papers, magazine and newspaper articles, short stories, you name it. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. And I've been collecting stories on the mental shelf, thinking, when the day comes that I finally retire, I'm going to write for the rest of my life. I finally retired, realized that I had the time, and started to write. And I've got a laundry list of things I want to write, but it starts with these 2 books, which recount the 19 years that I was in law enforcement. And the stories that are presented in these 2 books are presented in chronological order. They start in about 1968 with my association with the Palo Alto Police Department. And then they cover the 4 years that I served as a criminal investigator in the Air Force, 2 years in Spain and 2 years in New Mexico. And then the 5 years that I spent at the Atherton Police Department. The more interesting stories and incidents that I encountered in those experiences are told in book 1 of the Copper Chronicles. Every single one of the stories is true. They're all told exactly as they happened. On advice of counsel, I changed the names and the locations to protect both the innocents and the idiots, because some of the folks are still alive who were involved in these capers. And then book 2 picks up when I moved to the San Jose Police Department and covers 10 years worth of incidents that I handled in San Jose. And same thing, there's no embellishment. The stories are told exactly as they happened, only the names and locations are changed. So instead of San Jose, it's St. Julian. Instead of Atherton, it's Alicante. But anybody who has lived or worked or been through any of those towns or locations will likely recognize what I'm talking about. The books are available in paperback and ebook form on Amazon. I'm working on the 3rd book right now. The 2nd one served as a launch pad into a series of fictional novels that are all completely fictional, but the central character, the protagonist, is the same. So at the end of book 2, he leaves law enforcement and he enters into a whole new world of fictional adventures that are at least tangentially related to his life before.
Give me a little bit about what your hero is and what his perspective is, and is he you or is he a bit like you? And
without question, it's me. These are my lived experiences.
Yeah.
I took a pseudonym. Matt Thorne is
Yes.
the name of the officer.
Yeah.
But the incidents that are covered in here were so emotional, so visceral, so impactful that it was easy for me to just kind of open the faucet and let them come out. And I hope that the reader is able to experience some of that emotion. There are moments that cause me to laugh, moments that cause me to cry, and moments that still give me angst when I think about them.
Are you digesting this now as you're reliving? I mean, your life has been so action packed. I don't know that you always had a lot of time for reflection.
Oh, I think life is the act and art of reflection.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's like there are multiple multi-screen, theaters playing in my head all the time, and it's an awful lot of fun to concentrate on this one, and then move to that one, all the while realize that there's stuff gestating that hasn't yet come to the screen back over here. But every incident that's in there I can recall instantly. Can I give you an example?
Please.
So I worked with a wonderful, beautiful fellow named John Proctor. I don't know what I called him in the book. I can't recall. But I was in the locker room one evening coming off a swing shift, and John was coming on midnight shift. So I was changing into my civvies. He was changing into his uniform. And I heard him talking to another officer who was going on duty with him. And he was telling him about his badge collection, because John was a big collector of police badges, law enforcement badges. And he said to the fellow, you know, what I'd really like to get my hands on is an air police badge. They just don't make them. And I said, John, I wasn't part of the conversation. I said, John, I just heard you say you were looking for an air police badge. I was an air cop for the Air Force when they switched from air police to security police. And I got one of the last air police badges. If you'd like it, I'll give it to you. And he was just, it was like a kid who had come downstairs on Christmas morning. He said, are you kidding? And this is a sterling silver, lovely badge with the Air Force emblem and the words Air Police down on the bottom, scrolling across. I said, I'll bring it in tomorrow night for you. And he just couldn't believe it. So it was my weekend. So I wasn't coming back to work until the next week. But I made a reminder to remember to, get the badge. And when I got home, I searched for it and I put it in the glove box of my car so I wouldn't forget. Well, I go back to work after my days off. It's the end of swing shift. I'm dressing out. John Proctor is getting ready to go out. And silly me, I was occupied with how busy it had been and the reports I had done, the arrests I had made. I wasn't thinking about John and the badge. And John was like an expectant father. He was just kind of prancing around, waiting for me to say something, and I didn't. I just finished changing out and I went home. And if I had looked back, I probably would have seen a very crestfallen John Proctor. I got in my car. I drove the 15 minutes to home. I got out. I started getting ready for bed. And as I lay down, I had this niggling feeling, this unease, and I couldn't put my finger on it. Then I remembered. I sat up. The badge. So I jumped in my clothes. I raced down to the police department with the badge in my center console, thinking I've got to give it to John. I've got to make right on my promise. Well, it's now the middle of the night. It's after midnight. I'm driving north on Middlefield Road, leaving Menlo Park, entering Atherton, singularly focused on getting the badge to John Proctor, and I see a huge pile of dust swirl off to the west shoulder of Middlefield Road. And I'm thinking to myself, I know that stretch of road, it's just trees and dirt. That's not good. And as I pulled up, my headlights illuminated off peripheral light a red, don't remember whether it was a Chevrolet or a Pontiac, but had gone off the road and head on into a tree and just destroyed the front end of the car. And I could see a young woman in the driver's seat. Glass had shattered. She was screaming in pain and fear. So I hit the binders, hit the curb, jumped out of my car, and this was well before cell phones existed, ran over, and this poor gal when she had hit the tree, the force carried her forward and it literally scalped her. The headliner took her scalp from the top of the forehead all the way back. And her scalp was peeled back, lying on the back of her head, and she was bleeding profusely. And I looked in and I could see that her legs were trapped in the mangled metal of the pedals and the floorboard that had collapsed. So she was stuck and she was in bad shape. Well, I screamed at the top of my lungs because there was a fence on one side of Middlefield and a fence on the other side. And directly on the other side of those fences were people's residences. Now, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, but I do have the ability to project with some command presence. And I yelled like gangbusters. And sure enough, a couple lights went on. A man came to the back wall and his fence, looked over and said, what happened? And I said, call 911. Tell them we need fire, paramedics, and police, all code 3. Right here, right now. And he disappeared and made the call. I climbed in through the back seat, climbed over the front seat, sat down next to this woman, took a hold of her hand. I took the patch of her scalp and folded it back over the top of her head, and then used my sleeve to wipe the blood out of her eyes. I introduced myself to her in a very calm voice, told her my name, asked her name, told her that help was on the way, and that I was going to stay with her until help arrived and she would be okay. That calmed her a little bit, and instead of screaming and flailing, she just started whimpering and breathing kind of ragged. And sure enough, fire from Menlo Station, I think 1 up on Middlefield Road, rolled up northbound, and the blue and red lights of a police car came southbound on Middlefield, and pretty soon we had the emergency services community literally right there on the scene. Fire guys rolled in, they took out a Hearst tool, they did a little assessment, and they cut the top off the car, and then they cut the brake pedal and gas pedal and all the other stuff away from her. All the while I was holding her head and holding her hand, and then I transferred her to the paramedics. They put her on a gurney and took her to the Stanford Hospital to get treated, and she was fine. She recovered. There had been a cop out on the street directing traffic all the while this was unfolding. And once the woman was loaded up into the paramedic rig and on her way, I kind of got to settle down a little bit and take a breath. And when I got out, the cop who was directing traffic walked over to me, and it was John Proctor. And he said, that was kind of fortuitous. Nicely done. And I said, nicely done to you too. And I pulled out the badge from my pocket and I said, John, I came to give you this. And handed him the badge, and it became a part of his collection.
Beautiful. Jeffrey Munks, The Copper Chronicles. Get it on Amazon. What a great thing. We could go on and on and on.
Thank you so much, Mark.
This was great.
Thanks.
I'm Mark Baer, YourTown Television, and we're gone.